Hello and welcome to chapter 4 of our exploration through the worlds of Wuthering Heights. We're now looking at the chapter that introduces our other main narrator of Wuthering Heights, the inner frame narrator, because we've got Lockwood as the outer frame, we've got the inner frame narrator Nelly Dean, who is the housekeeper at Thrushcross Grange, and we left Lockwood recovering from his supernatural encounter and his long walk back through the snow back to Thrushcross Grange, where he can get a bit of pampering. That's what he likes, old Lockwood, everyone's favourite Wally as he is. So we will start off by analysing the chapter. Here we go. Right. So we have, I thought this was an interesting first sentence of the chapter. What vain weathercocks we are. Notice that Bronte gives Lockwood a first person plural pronoun there. What vain weathercocks we are, as in we misjudge the weather. Well, actually, Lockwood, you're the only one who misjudged the weather. So again, a sign of his pomposity and his ego there as well. Again, Bronte's got this style for Lockwood she gives him, where he's got this very heightened, exaggerated way of speaking or communicating to us as the reader, who are determined to hold myself independent of all social intercourse. So he means talking to people. So overblown, isn't it? Then he also says how obviously this part of the world he'd deliberately chosen because he thought he can be alone because he had that pathetic love affair. But now I was finally compelled to strike my colours, as in reveal his true colours effectively. It's a term borrowed from kind of naval, it's a naval metaphor really. And then we have, under pretence of gaining information concerning the necessities of my establishment, I desired Mrs. Dean, when she brought in supper, to sit down while I ate it. So this is Emily Bronte's framing mechanism for telling us the story. So she's got Lockwood has arrived. He's someone who's an outsider. He's someone who doesn't know the world of Wuthering Heights. But now he's going to be talking to his housekeeper of the house that he's renting, and she's going to be the means at which Bronte can fill us in as readers about all the information that's gone on, everything, the history of Wuthering Heights over the past few years, over the last 20 years or so. So bear that in mind with this. And Bronte adopts a completely different style, a different voice for Nelly Dean. Sometimes you also see her referred to as Ellen Dean, as well, it's the same person. But for Nelly, she's much clearer, much easier to understand than pompous old Lockwood. So we get a little bit of her background here. And Lockwood has an idea of, he wants to get more information about Heathcliff's family. And he wants to know about the pretty girl widow, as in, this is young Catherine, of course, that he met at the Heights. I should like to know her history. He wants to know more about her. How come she's ended up so poor, effectively? Questions that we have as readers. Why is Heathcliff letting out Thrushcross Grange when he's living in the much rougher Wuthering Heights? What's going on there? He's really rich. He has nobody knows what money, and every year it increases. That's Nelly's own commentary there. Yes, he's rich enough to live in a finer house than this, but he's very near, so he can live in a grander house than Thrushcross Grange. He's got tons of money, tons and tons. He's very wealthy. So Lockwood effectively has this conversation with Nelly, where we're learning about all of the details. And you can look up family trees, is a good thing. If you're confused, look up Wuthering Heights family trees, and they really help actually as you're reading it and trying to understand the novel. It's very useful. You can make your own one as well. That's another way, even better. You'll remember it better. But there's plenty out there on the internet you can look up, or even in books. So we have Lockwood's own confusion about Linton. Notice, of course, in the novel you have characters with repeated names, but I suppose this is really to add to the confusion, probably, that Bronte is conveying from Lockwood as well, for outsiders, people in the area. All of this is a lot of it is kind of more common knowledge, isn't it, about the identities of members of these two important families in the area. And we're outsiders to the story as well. So it could be to do with creating a sense of alienation for the reader as well, with all these repeated names. It's also actually a 19th century cultural thing where names were repeated a lot and you'd name people after other relatives and things like that. And we'll see a lot of that in the novel. But it is a 19th century cultural thing. And I know the early part of the novel is set in the late 18th century. But there we go. So there's clarification here about the lady's cousin then. So that's Hareton. Yes, and her husband was her cousin also. One on the mother's, the other on the father's side. Heathcliff married Mr. Linton's sister. So, yeah, cousins. So young Catherine was married to her cousin. Okay, Hareton is also a cousin as well. Different sides of the family. Again, it wasn't necessarily that uncommon in the era for cousins to marry. I don't know if it's still legal anymore. I don't know, but you don't hear of it happening very often. But anyway, probably best if I move on. Then we have Mrs. Heathcliff. She looked very well and very handsome, yet I think not very happy. Lockwood's appraisal of Mrs. Heathcliff, as in young Catherine, is quite superficial, isn't it, really? A lot of it is based on her appearance. But he's right about that bit. Nice quotation for Heathcliff here from Nelly. Rough as a sore edge and hard as whinstone. The less you meddle with him, the better. That's a very good advice there, isn't it, really, considering how Heathcliff is. And if you know the rest of the story, yeah, it makes even more sense. Interesting line here, a natural reference, the history of Heathcliff. It's a cuckoo's, sir. And of course, in nature, what are cuckoos famous for? Well, they're famous for taking over other birds' nests, laying their own eggs in it, and then the other birds bring up their children for them. So hopefully you can see why that might make sense in the story. We need to go back to that bit, actually. So she knows all about it except where he was born and who were his parents and how he got that, as we're looking at the narrative. So yeah, it was a delay on the page changing there. Sorry about that. So that sounds like quite a lot missing, but actually it's fine. Then Hareton has been cast out like an unfledged dunnock. So basically Hareton doesn't realise he's been cheated out of all this wealth that Heathcliff has. Really, in the normal course of things, should have been his, because Hareton is the last Earnshaw and Wuthering Heights was the Earnshaw family home, and really it should all be to Hareton, really, but it's not worked out like that. So then we have this marks here, this line is marking here. Before I came to live here, she commenced. So Lockwood is framing, or Bronte has Lockwood framing Nelly's narration. So there's many reasons why this is a confusing novel. That's another one. So we get the backstory. Old Mr. Earnshaw, who was the dad of young Catherine, the one we've had the diary on, and her brother Hindley, who was also mentioned in the diary as well. This is when Heathcliff is introduced into the family, basically. This is the story of how that happened. You have old Mr. Earnshaw, well, he's not that old actually at this point, but Mr. Earnshaw, he's going to walk to Liverpool. So over 3 days, he's going to walk to Liverpool, do business in Liverpool, and then walk back on the third day. That's 60 miles. You have to think, would you be prepared to spend a whole day walking 60 miles? So obviously in those days, people would be prepared to do that. So Hindley wants a fiddle as a present. Cathy wants a whip. It's for horses, just to make that clear. And Nelly's going to get some fruit. But he's not just going to buy those things, he's going on other business as well. So he's a long time back. They wait for him. He comes back late on the third day. But here's the big twist. He doesn't just bring those gifts with him. Well, actually, he doesn't completely do that. More importantly, what he brings with him is a child. You must even take it as a gift of God, though it's as dark almost as if it came from the devil. So there's a few things going on with this. Let's unpack this. So, right, shall we start with the nice stuff? You must take it as a gift of God. So he's found a child on the streets. We find out the details here, actually what happens. We find out the streets of Liverpool, he finds a child, doesn't know who he belongs to, where his family are, so Earnshaw takes him in, which in many ways makes me laugh because there's no forms to sign, there's nothing like that. He could be really dodgy, there's all manner of things, isn't there? But a lot of the time, 19th century fiction, you get these stories of benefactors, philanthropists, people who believe in kind of the goodness of humanity and will do things for the sake of being good. And if you think about things like Oliver Twist, you've got similar ideas going in, people being taken in and looked after. It happens, in a lot of 19th century fiction. So sometimes the person who takes them in isn't kind, sometimes they can be cruel in some of these novels, sometimes they are kind. It just depends. It just depends. Also, though, look at this. Though it's as dark almost as if it came from the devil. So this is our first reference to Heathcliff's ambiguous ethnicity. Let's put it like that. It also shows the ingrained prejudices of the time, because they're linking dark to devil. So it's as dark as though it came from the devil. It's very vague. How dark his skin is open to your interpretation. Actually, you look at it, and actually people from this kind of rural Yorkshire location, they're going to be very ignorant about race. And at the time, Liverpool was one of the most important international ports in the world, trading all over the place. So actually Liverpool did have more of an ethnic mix than people tend to think. Obviously history often gets kind of whitewashed in many ways, and the way it's presented, and it's kind of presented as kind of homogeneously white. But actually in a lot of these very busy, particularly the ports, cities, even in London, hundreds of years, like in Shakespeare's time, you did actually get more of a mix. Not as much of a mix as in more recent centuries, over the last century, not as much as a mix there, but definitely more than is generally believed by the wider public. So Heathcliff's ethnicity, it's open to your interpretation of it. Channel 4 film version had a black Heathcliff. There's lines in this that sometimes suggest he's referred to him as a gypsy. There's some lines in the novel that suggest maybe he's Indian. There's plenty of scope for interpretation. So you can decide, you can think about it. So we've got some details about him, but they would be ignorant. They wouldn't know in that area, in a farmhouse like Wuthering Heights, they don't know anything really about the wider world. And 60 miles walk to Liverpool as well, so, But look at this. So there's a few things here about him. Dirty, ragged, black-haired child. He's obviously speaking another language, repeated over and over again, some gibberish that nobody can understand. Again, that shows the prejudice, doesn't it? So he's speaking another language that is dismissed as gibberish. So for them, they think he's talking nonsense, but it's probably a language. Which language? We don't know. It could be, Romany. It could be an African language. We obviously don't know which one. It could be Indian. We don't know. It could be an Indian language, obviously. Lots of different languages. So yeah, there's just general ignorance, so we don't know. Or it could be that he is speaking gibberish. He's been living on the streets, no one's raised him, and he doesn't know how to speak English, and he doesn't know how to speak any language, and it's his own language. It could be that. But I prefer the idea of Heathcliff has probably got some international background, something because of Liverpool. It just seems to me, the fact that he's found in Liverpool, I don't know. For me, that's what I think. I don't know. But as to exactly what ethnicity he is, that is up to you. But we've got description here as a gypsy brat. So again, it still shows prejudice. Whatever ethnicity is, you can see the prejudices here as well. But you've got this very strange paradox where the prejudice is there, but Earnshaw, even though he does show prejudice in a way, he's brought him in out of kindness, and he does treat him well, and he likes Heathcliff. He loves Heathcliff, actually. Then notice, look, seeing it starving. So non-gendered object pronouns are used to describe Heathcliff all the time. It. So that dehumanises him, doesn't it? It's not very nice to kind of use it like that. So there's a kind of detachment here in what Bronte has Nelly, in the way that Bronte has Nelly describe Heathcliff. There's a kind of detachment. So this is the account of Earnshaw decides to bring the child home. Told me to wash it. You know, he's like a pair of boots or something, isn't he? He's described there as an object. He's objectified and dehumanised. He's also Heathcliff is described in this account as the stupid little thing. So again, more prejudice on display. I put it on the landing of the stairs, hoping it might be gone on the morrow. That's the same way you might treat an animal. That's what Nelly does. She describes that she does. She gets in trouble for it, though, because Mr. Earnshaw, I was obliged to confess, she had to confess to him, and in recompense for my cowardice and inhumanity was sent out of the house. So Nelly was temporarily chucked out, really, for being so cruel to Heathcliff there. Then her verdict of him as a child isn't particularly kind and generous, really. He seemed a sullen, patient child, hardened perhaps to ill treatment. Well, actually, in that case, there is a hint there of maybe he's had a life of abuse, and that's why he takes hardships and endures hardships so well, because he's used to it, unfortunately. So it sounds like he must have had a life of abuse. Old Earnshaw, Mr. Earnshaw, the father, he protects Heathcliff, the poor fatherless child, as he called him. So Bronte uses emotive lexical choices to reinforce that there. This drives a rift between Earnshaw and Hindley, who Hindley is the biological son of Mr. Earnshaw. So he's jealous of him. When all three of them have got measles, Heathcliff is described as that he was uncomplaining as a lamb, which is unusual animal imagery to use for Heathcliff, because it's got connotations of innocence and even Christianity as well, actually. You think of Jesus is sometimes referred to as the lamb. So, a bit unusual for Heathcliff here. So, I find, when you look at Nelly as well, the way she talks about Heathcliff, she's quite inconsistent, actually, as well. So sometimes she seems very judgmental. She seems quite cruel herself sometimes in the way that she's describing. Some prejudices come through as well. Then other times in the novel, she does things where she seems to help and sympathise with Heathcliff and enable him in a way to have more of a relationship with Cathy as well, with the original Cathy. So she's very inconsistent. But people are inconsistent in real life, aren't they? We could argue it's like that. I still couldn't dote on Heathcliff, and I wondered often what my master saw to admire so much in the sullen boy. So she doesn't get what the big appeal is. There's an account of a moment when Heathcliff as a child. Remember though, Nelly is an unreliable narrator, so we don't know if this stuff even happened at all, or if it happened in this way. So don't necessarily take everything that Nelly's saying at face value, because it might not actually be true. But there's a story about how Heathcliff manipulates Hindley, particularly in terms of relationship with Earnshaw, as in the father, because Heathcliff knows that he's favoured. So he manipulates things so he gets the best horse, there's things like that. But again, unreliable narrator is a key term. Lockwood's unreliable, but Nelly's also unreliable as well. So Bronte's instruments for conveying the story to us, the narrative to us, it's not necessarily exactly as what happened. And it's also, from Nelly as well, it's based on memory. So even without biases and your own personal opinions, when you're telling a story from memory, that's also unreliable, isn't it? Because you make mistakes with things you remember, and you miss out details and you get things wrong, and that happens all the time. So we have that exchange there. And also, significantly here, I almost said insignificantly, but I meant the opposite. Significantly here, lots of kind of devil language we get in terms of reference to Heathcliff, imp of Satan. So that's an interesting metaphor there, as you imagine him like a little imp. But I think that's interesting. So then we have final line I thought was interesting in this chapter. He complained so seldom indeed of such stirs as these, as in when he's getting into fights with when Heathcliff is getting into fights with Hindley, it's too many H names. He complained so seldom indeed of such stirs as these, so basically Nelly means getting into fights and things, that I really thought him not vindictive. I was deceived completely, as you will hear. So Bronte deliberately ends the chapter to intrigue us about, or actually Heathcliff is vindictive, and actually that is one of his key character traits that you're going to see throughout the whole novel. So it's again Bronte is encouraging us to read on, think about, and Lockwood as a character would ask, oh, why is he vindictive? Lockwood's going to want to hear more, isn't he? And if Lockwood wants to hear more, we want to hear more as well. So anyway, that was quite a short chapter actually. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Like, comment, subscribe, notification bell. Look at my other videos. I hope you find it useful. Keep reading. Farewell.